You've probably had or faced this or at least a similar situation at some point in your life. You are in some ways navigating multiple systems of people who have multiple expectations of you. This group wants this from you, this group expects that. Your family wants this, your work wants that. And finally, someone comes up to you in the midst of your frustration, puts a hand on your shoulder, looks at you and says something like, "You can't be all things to all people," which is supposed to make you take a deep breath and say, "Right." Well, that's the truth, at least I've learned. I can't be all things to all people. So what in the world is Paul talking about when he says, "I became all things to all people," other than Paul just being Paul and bragging like he sometimes tends to do? But that's not what he's doing in this case. Paul is calling us to another way of being. Paul is calling us deeper. First, he's talking in context to the people in Corinth, to the Corinthians, and they're kind of a pain. Let's just say they're kind of a group of people that are constantly having some kind of issue or another. Unlike the Philippians, Paul's much happier when he's talking to the Philippians, and they're just kind of nicer people. But the Corinthians, it's always one thing after another with them. They're fighting about whether they could do this or that or the other things. And one of the great debates of the day, and they were struggling with each other about, is whether or not they could eat meat that was sacrificed to idols. Well, Paul's saying you can, because idols actually don't have any power. They don't mean anything. So are we free to do it? Yes. But guess what? Some people are not in a place to understand that. For some people, that still has power and meaning. And so when we're with them, let's just not do it. Even though we can, let's not. For the sake, why? Of winning the other, of being in relationship to the other, and bringing God to the other. Paul has a way of explaining it. He says, to those who are under the law, like the Jews, of which he is one, I become like one under the law. To those who are not under the law, I become like one who is not. So to people who are strong, I become like that. To people who are weak, I become like that. It's a Pauline version of what the old people used to say when I was a kid, and they would say, Sean, there are two kinds of people in the world. Well, this is Paul's thing. There's two kinds of people in the world, right? The people who are under the law and not. And Paul's saying that it's important to walk alongside all people, to submit ourselves and to take away our own particularity for the sake of the other. But why is Paul willing to do this? Why would we want to be all things to all people? Why risk being a chameleon of compromise? Why give up freedom for servitude? Why should I give up the things that I believe for someone else? Well, Paul isn't saying we should do any of that. What he is saying is that there's a matter of urgency here, that the gospel, the love of God, transforms the world, and there's an urgency to it. So look, even if you think it's okay to eat meat sacrificed to idols, don't do it if it's going to allow you to be in relationship to someone and bring someone alongside of you and help to have them see the transformational power of God. How about just don't do it? How about we give up our own preferences just this one time or in this one circumstance for the sake of the other? Does that mean we have to give up our truth? Does that mean we have to give up what we believe? No, it doesn't. It means we submit ourselves for the sake of the gospel. What Paul is describing here is not assimilation. It's not kind of simple relativism. I become all things to all people. Everything's fine. Do what we want. We should just play to the lowest common denominator. No. What Paul is impressing upon us is the urgency of the task at hand. That simply a casual appreciation for God's love for the whole world is not enough. because it removes from us any sense of urgency about the task before it. It lays no burden at our feet to know their names or to understand their lives. Paul is calling us to a different way. Perhaps in this time that we find ourselves in, to think about what it would mean to set our own preferences aside, to hold on to our truth and in the core, but to set down our own preferences, to walk alongside those who may not be in the same place. What will this mean? It means the transformation of the world. The urgency that is here that Paul is bringing matters. Paul is saying that walking alongside our neighbor, that becoming like them for the sake of the gospel is imperative, because the unity which is at the center of God's message and the love which is at the center of God's message is imperative to share with the world, because it is a matter of life and death. St. Mark's, you know how to do that. This is what you do. You have the charisms of walking alongside. You know what it means to walk alongside others. You know what it means to sometimes set down your own preferences and your own way of being. This is one of the charisms of this St. Mark's congregation. It's good to be reminded by Paul of the urgency of the task, that as we continue to take up the mission of the gospel into this next year, which will look different than the year before, and which hopefully will see light at the end of the tunnel of this pandemic, I call you to continue to place upon yourselves this urgency, to walk alongside, to, in as many ways as you can, be all things to all people. We would help ourselves and our neighbors if we were to reflect, I think, on how well or how poorly we embody Paul's approach. Paul, in fact, by his own telling, was not all things to all people. He was run out of town. He was beaten by mobs. He was jailed by people who didn't agree with him and with whom he did not fully connect. We will not be all things to all people either, but 1/4 of the New Testament came from the hand of someone who believed a mission that mattered, who treated everyone as if they mattered to him and to God, and sought to embody a still more excellent way. Amen.